our turn. I'm LaQuetta Bush Simmons. I'm here with my amazing co-hosts, Trisette, Michelle, and Betty. We have an exciting show for you today on racial equity and social justice. We will be showing you an interview that I had with Dr. Edward Bush and sharing with you our vision and thoughts on the topic of social justice and inequity. So we're excited to bring him in. We, as a faith based community, often skirt around this tough topic
Yeah, we
because
do.
we're supposed to move in love and unity. So we don't want to face this topic. But the reality is, people are leaving the church because we're not. People
We're not
are
dealing with it, and it's time to deal with it, right?
right.
Yes.
People are dying because we're not. And so we're excited to have these conversations. So, what are you guys thinking about this topic of social justice and inequity?
It's been really ignored in the church. The church does not address it. The church does all other things, but we sit and watch when people are being killed, when riots are going on in our community, when all that is happening. The church has to speak,
Yeah.
especially for the voiceless, for those who are being abused.
It's also hard not to talk about it. If we're not talking about it in the church, I guarantee that we're talking about it at home. And what better time to talk about it than when we are in a group of people that love Christ, right?
Absolutely.
And that we have the truth, we have the Word of God. So I think it's about time we each talk a little bit about this topic. It's difficult to ignore. It's everywhere. It's on TV, social media.
Yes.
So yes,
In our history, especially in African American churches, it was the pinnacle of discussion. It's because we needed that equity to feel the same, in the community. And our community, we actually had communities now. The Black community is so truncated throughout the Southland, especially here in California. Do we have a community? We're kind of sprinkled all through. That has a lot to do with people and the inequity of how they feel about themselves.
And we're talking about the bigger picture of it. And we're going to, as we tape these shows, we're going to share some intimate encounter with racism and a system of racism. But we want to begin to talk about the broader understanding of what social equity is and what racism is, because it's not about an individual person, but it's about a system that has been put in place to hurt people of color.
Yes.
I want to introduce our speaker. Again, Dr. Edward Bush. He is the president of Cosumnes College, and he is a well-renowned speaker on social justice and inequity. And so we'd like to show that clip from an earlier interview.
I'm really just blessed to be able to spend part of my day with all of you, particularly around this critical topic. So when we talk about racism and structural inequities and white supremacy, I think it's important to know that we're not talking about a group of people, that we are talking about a structure and a system that perpetuates inequities across society. And we see that reflected in economics, in terms of the wealth gap between folks of color and white Americans. We see it reflected in what's called the achievement gap in education. We see it as it relates to the health disparities. So we're not talking about individual biases that may exist in communities or within communities. We talk about how structures are established, who has power, who does not have power, who have access to resources and who has little access or lack of access to resources. And so it's important to know when we talk about racism, the ism part of racism is critical because ism means systematic. And so when we talk about terms around equity, I define equity as fairness, freedom, and justice, right? That everyone doesn't need the same thing at all at the same time. And that's what equal means. Equity is around the idea, what does it take to make someone whole? Or what does it take to make a community whole? And those needs varies based on the conditions, the experience, and the histories of those particular communities. For me, it's hard to disassociate this country from racism, right? When we understand that the country was founded on racist ideas and was founded on racist principles and ideas, that even when we look at the altruistic language around that was in the Constitution around freedom and justice for all, we know that Black people, enslaved Africans, was not included in that language. That what they were talking about very specifically, white male landowners. Even in the founding of this country, Black people were dehumanized. It's in the Constitution that Black people were defined as being 3/5 human. And so the issue is that America has to begin to address its historic legacy of racism that just started with enslavement, but definitely did not end there. We see a pattern of marginalization as it relates to African American and folks of color in this country. So we look at Jim Crow laws, we look at lynchings, we look at redlining. We look at all these issues that have permeated our society since Africans arrived to this country that is problematic. And I liken racial justice work similar to a 12-step program. That is a process. And America is still struggling with between denial and awareness. That May 25th in George Floyd, for some people, they just begin to be aware of the racial issues that has plagued this country for a very long time. I was just reading an article yesterday that still like there's over 56% of evangelical pastors believe that racism doesn't exist. So we're still struggling with the idea that there's a such thing as racial injustice and inequity. I believe there's like this cognitive dissonance, this purposeful and intentional emotional disconnect, because it's hard for people to wrap their head around the suffering and pain that has been inflicted on people. And for you to own that causes you to reflect on your role in which you play to perpetuate and support such structures. I mean, many people who are not folks of color does not even have to think about race. And that's when we begin to talk about terms like white privilege. And privilege is when you have the luxury of not even have to think about what happens to your son if they get pulled over by the police, right? It's the luxury when you go shopping, we're in a holiday season, and you want to buy a doll for your daughter or for your goddaughter or your niece. You have to search all the aisles, look in the back to find a doll that looks like your doll. It's the luxury when you go to the store and you look for something as simple as a flesh-colored Band-Aid and it only comes in beige. It's the luxury where you do not have to protect your children from images that they see on TV because you know that they're going to have negative images of who they are. We have learned in this country and haven't realized how insidious racism really is and the damage in which it's caused, that we are in a society that says that the closer you are to white, the righter you are. And it's damaging. So we see that reflected even when we go to church. We see pictures and images of angels that rarely to never look like someone who's Black or brown. And we don't even stop to contemplate what damage that takes psychologically in the mind of a young African American who already gets reinforced with this idea and this concept that they're less than all the images that's reflected of everything that's supposed to be good and beautiful doesn't look like you. And so we haven't yet come to grips with this idea of the psychological damage and harm that folks face every day to wear Black skin.
Several points that I really kind of want us to look at just a little and for you guys to add in. And he talked about that we live in a point of denial and awareness. That's as a country, for us to really face the totality of the suffering of people, that has caused us to disconnect, and that we live in this space of denying what has happened and being aware of what has happened. And we did see that with George Floyd, that now was awakening, that people saw it and now had to face that. What are some of your thoughts about that tension?
The incident with George Floyd woke a lot of people up. It doesn't bridge the fact that, there are still inequities in our community,
Absolutely.
that bring to the heart of what's going on right now. We can't look at that and think, that's the whole consensus of the country. And I think that one incident, was for me personally was blown out of proportion.
Okay, so I'm gonna push on that just a little,
Go ahead. Go ahead.
because what the consciousness and awareness piece is that it wasn't just one incident, that it was indicative of several. So for people who saying that I've heard to say this is an ongoing experience, what do you say to them?
Even when we look at that one incident, I think to me, it just showed the true color. I keep running it in my head again and again and again. Here is one human being putting his knee on another human being's neck. And the one laying on the ground who's dying is screaming, "Mama." He's calling his mother. He's in pain. He's saying, "I'm dying. I can't breathe." And this other individual kept on pushing, kept on pressing to finish him, to kill him. It was a demonically operated
Yes, it was.
act. It was inhuman. It was evil. That's the only way I can look at it. To me, it took the whole struggle, the whole killing of the police brutality and everything that has been happening in our community, it took it to the next level.
Yeah.
So, this, when he said this is systematic, it is systematic. It is there. And we cannot run away from it. We cannot ignore it. Maybe over exaggerated. Yeah, I agree with that, because all the riot and everything that went on, it was not necessary.
I think it's unfair to say it was over exaggerated. I think that to see someone publicly killed on TV was executed, and a person's response, I think it's unfair to say that the pain and how people express was over exaggerated. I think that's more hurtful and damaging, as being the one that's killed. I just
I
think that's
think when we
fair.
come to the looting and the destroying and
But
doing
that wasn't
all that,
protest.
huh?
That was evil too. We're talking about people, good people who were protesting the pain.
Yeah, they protest in the pain. Maybe there's another way of dealing with it. That for me, it bothered me as well. But the killing and the racism and what has been done is just it
Yeah.
cannot be justified. It's wrong. And
Yeah.
that's all I can say.
I agree. I think that the reason why this was caught on camera is, God brings everything that's done in darkness to the light.
Yes.
And this type of police brutality that's happening throughout the nation, in America, needed to be brought to the light. I think that bringing it to the head actually brought people to this awareness, but it should bring people to this awareness as a country, to let us figure out what can be done, to stop the systematic racism, to stop the inequities. And I think that conversation has started.
What?
But I think that the church has to be behind this whole issue. And when he said 56% of the white churches don't even believe there's racism, to me, it's mind-boggling. There is racism. We live it.
Yeah, and there's still all white churches, all black churches, which is ludicrous in this day and age.
Say it again?
I said there's still white churches and
the fact
black
that
churches and Hispanic churches, when heaven certainly isn't going to look like that.
No,
I want us to bring us back because we're going to have to go to a break. So the bigger issues that I think that Dr. Bush brought up is for us to understand that it is a system, that is not just people, and we want to make it people, that we have to look at the overall system. But he also talks about the trauma and pain that is this racist system has caused people, and that we have to look at how we treat that trauma and pain that as people of color we have faced. And before we transition, we see it in COVID. We saw that the inequity in healthcare caused disproportionately people of color to die from COVID. And that is a direct result of the disparity in healthcare and a disparity in how people are treated. And we saw it played out in the rate in which people were dying in communities of color. And that's just one recent example of how systematic racism and disparity in systems can hurt groups of people in our community. So, Dr. Bush, also, I want us to talk about the definition of social justice. He talked about that it being fairness, freedom, and justice, and that equity was about making sure that every community and every person is whole.
So the concept of the foundation, the truth of being every person whole and equal comes from the Bible. Genesis. God created man and woman. He created in his image, likeness. It doesn't say he created the black man less than the white man. It doesn't say any of that. So we know the truth. The truth is that God created all of us equal. So that's where this whole thing needs to start. And that's where the church, to me, the church should lead. The church should set the example of loving everyone unconditionally and moving with compassion to understand the pain and the suffering that other people go through, whether we're Black or Hispanic or Asian, whomever we are. The church needs to lead, is what I'm thinking.
But the church, I believe, needs to lead in acknowledging its history and what it did.
Yes.
And until the church says, yeah, we played a part and it was wrong, I think true reconciliation can happen. If we continue to ignore it, when I went to Ghana, I went to the slave, they call it castle. I call it dungeon because it wasn't.
Dungeon, yes. The most horrible place I have ever seen.
The church was literally in the middle of this castle.
Yes.
And that it would have pastors and preachers would come out in the midst of some of this horrific damage that was happening of the enslavement of people. There was a slave ship called the slave ship Jesus Christ.
Yes.
And until we as a church to say we blew it. We blew it. We got this wrong. And then literally be on this mission of reconciliation because God gave us that ministry. Then we're able to be in the forefront of that. And it starts with the acknowledgement of saying, we're sorry.
You know, the word is so beautiful when it says if we humble ourselves,
yes,
and repent of our wicked ways, you know, there's something good in store for those that are able to recognize their faults. And I think we could start right now. You know, I think we all have things that we need to kind of think back and say, have I ever maybe done something that I shouldn't? And thank you, Pastor Laquetta, because I do think that's very important for all of us, you know, to kind of go back and say, did I ever offend anybody? Maybe not intentionally, yeah, but there's a reward, there's blessing when you repent and when you humble yourself. So thank you. Beautiful.
I think that God has a very good example in Jesus Christ. Christ loved everyone. That's what the church needs to portray. You know, that Jesus, it doesn't care about who you are. I mean, Jesus treated everyone the same with respect and love. And I think that that's the issue here. Racism is a matter of the heart. That's what needs to be changed. You know, that's what needs to be taught, you know, from a very young age, because it's hatred is, and racism is a matter of the heart. And no matter what the church does or anyone does, it's not going to change, you know, until that aspect is, is realized.
Right.
See, the other side of something we need to look at also is there is an action and there is a reaction. In the sight of God, they are all either good or bad. So let's say Pastor Laquera really offended me today and just abused me and said something really bad, where my heart is, I'm offended, I'm hurt. So she acted, I reacted. I'm carrying this hurt and unforgiveness and bitterness in my heart all my life. I'm going to carry it throughout whatever. In the sight of God, she sinned and I'm sinning too.
Right.
So at some point also, see, I hold the whole church, Black church, white church, Hispanic church, everybody, the whole church needs to come. The hurt and the hurting, we all need to come to God and to ourselves and to our community and find that reconciliation, that peace, and that love. Otherwise, you did bad, and then I'm going to respond and do bad. And we all will stand before Him one day. So what will happen? So this racism thing, it needs to find there has to be a solution.
Yeah.
Because it's hurting the Black community and even the Hispanic community, every community is hurting. And then
Asian community
are hurting too. They don't know it, but they're hurting too. So what is the solution?
Part of the solution is being part of the healing process too. So we can say we're sorry and we can forgive, but there's still some pain, residual pain as a result of it. So we have to be willing to be a part of healing people as a result of the racism that they have affected. In the Bible, God talks about reconciliation, but He also talks about restitution. That there's restitution to those people that you have hurt. And we want to say, I love you now, and ignore the scars and the wounds and the injury. But love also heals, and it just doesn't forgive. So if we as a church says, now we're going to change, we're going to love, and we're going to come together as a united body, we also have to look at what was the damage that was done to generations and generations of people. So we cannot ignore that. We can't say, once I say, I'm sorry, I forgive you, that if you just knocked me in the head, that the bruise still needs some attention. And we get upset with people because they say, I'm still bleeding. And you say, well, I said I loved you and I'm sorry, but I'm still bleeding. And we have to be willing to be a part of the healing process too.
But Pastor Laquera, let's look at this a little bit deeper.
Oh, I'm willing.
You offended me. I'm offended. You're not even coming to say I'm sorry. You don't even care about my blood. I'm bleeding. You're watching it. You walked away. I gotta take care of me. At the end of the day, I have to be responsible for me. So that offense I'm carrying in my heart because I love God, because I love me also, because I know that if I carry that offense, it's going to be like a hindrance for my growth, a hindrance for my prosperity, my well-being. I gotta deal with it. I gotta come to terms with it.
Absolutely.
But your question,
she's wrong. I choose to forgive her. I choose to let it go, and I choose to walk above all the ignorance, all the stupidity, all the meanness, all the evil. I have to walk up. I have to walk above it.
But your question was, and I was addressing your question, you said, what can the church do to end that? So I'm talking about the collective effort. Now, if you're talking about individual healing, I have another resolve for that. I think that as a community, as people of color, that we are responsible for healing ourselves, regardless if they say they're sorry or not. But the question was, as the church, what we need to do. And just saying, I'm sorry and I love you is not enough.